Hi, John McCarty here with Odyssey Test Prep alongside John. And today we're going to discuss a little bit about setting up your study schedule, what that should look like. So, John, why don't you give us a few of your quick tips on, if people are starting their studies or if they're even midway through their studies, what should they be thinking about?
Yeah, I think this is such an important topic, and it's one that gets brought up a lot. Obviously, everyone's going to have different um, things that work for them, but I think there are some key things that everyone can implement, regardless of where they are. And I would say it's important to bear in mind um, a system that keeps you consistent, a system that is personalized, and because it's personalized, it could be like adapted to fit whatever's happening outside of studying.
Yeah, and so something that you can do consistently. I think that's important because sometimes I'll talk to people and say, I'm going to study 10 hours a day, every day for 100 days, and
Yeah,
then I'll be ready to go. And
yeah,
that's not, for most people, it's not super realistic.
yeah. I think that's an excellent point, and I know through a lot of our conversations, I've always paralleled um, LSAT studying to exercise, but I really do think there are some similarities. And exactly like you said, John, right? Some people they really want to hit the ground running, and then they set these standards, like you said. If I can't study for 3 4 hours, then I won't study. I have to do 3 4 hours. It's like, maybe
Hmm.
that's not realistic, right? And if you set like an hour a day, and it sounds so like so trite, right? Something like, oh, of course, okay, just do a little bit each day, but that compounding interest of you're touching base every single day, or more consistently, is so important. I'm thinking of friends that exercise, right? And they're like, okay, I'm gonna go to the gym 5 times a week. And it's like, how about we get you in the gym, 2 times a week, 3 times a week, not for two
Hmm.
hours, but how about 30 minutes? So I think that consistency is so important. Mm.
Yeah, and definitely finding something that works around each individual schedule.
Yes.
Like, I know when I was studying, my schedule was crazy. So I was
Yeah.
working at an inbound call center. So answering the
Mm.
phone, if you're calling the power company, this is what I
Yeah.
was doing.
Yeah.
So I'd answer the phone and then I would talk to them, help them with their power bill, whatever issue they had, and then I'd wait for the next call. So I would bring my book with me to work
Yeah.
and start there at 7 a.m. And then in between calls, I'd be hitting like a logical reasoning question or a concept.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
ideal. I wouldn't
Yeah.
recommend this as the like pinnacle of studying, but this was
Yeah.
something I could commit to. I'm already there. It
Yeah.
already, quite frankly, sucks, right?
Yeah.
I'm working in a call center. And
Mhm.
so if it's going to suck, I might as well get something really cool out of it and be like
Yes.
moving on my way towards my actual goals.
Yes.
And so, and like for lunch break, instead of going and hanging out with people in the break room, I would go to my car, eat a sandwich, and work through the book. I get a half hour in at that point, and then keep doing that. And then in between classes, and then when I got home for an hour or two at night, where I could actually sit down and get some really focused studying going. Um, but for me, that was something I could commit to. But I really couldn't commit to a Friday night sitting in there and
Yeah.
doing in books. I had to have an outlet and
Yeah.
somewhere, be able to go out, hang out with some friends, see some people, do
Yeah.
some stuff that I enjoyed. Same thing on like a
Yeah.
Saturday and Sunday I would start to get back into the mode Sunday night, but for me that worked. And again, I don't think that's the ideal schedule for most people, but maybe a lot of people don't have the same constraints because I was also doing 18 credit hours at the time. So when I was off work at
Yeah.
4, I was straight to class, be there
Yeah.
till 9, study for a couple hours, go to sleep, do the whole thing all over again. But what did your schedule look like roughly?
Yeah. Just one comment I wanted to say was, John, I think it's so cool how you personalize it to you, and you realize, hey, this might not work for everyone, but this is what worked for me. Also, I really like what you said about you knew yourself enough to know, hey, if I study Friday, Saturday, this it'll be like empty calories. It'll be like fluff. I'm sitting down, but I'm not really getting anything done. And you do
And
need
I would,
that recharging. Yeah.
yeah, and I would give it up in a week.
Yeah.
There's at that point in time, there's no way I was going 2 weekends straight of
Yeah.
not going out and having time. So
Yeah.
like, I would never reach consistency if that was what like my goal was going to be, was
Yeah.
to just study all the way through every waking hour of life,
Mhm.
because I would have just gone insane at that point. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Um,
so
for
tell people, what
mhm.
was your studying look like? Is
Yeah.
it, everybody was different, right? And you got to
Yes.
find what works.
Yeah. But I think through hearing everyone's system, if someone has a system that works, you see some pieces that everyone kind of like, some certain variables that people like, okay, a lot of people touch on this variable. So I would say for
Yeah.
me, so I was working remote, so a little bit more flexible, but um,
Okay.
at the time, things I guess were a little crazy with uh, outside things with like relationship, family, and something. So I really did need to like use my time wisely, um, and I would say, well, first of all, when I think personalized, I always start and ask people, are you a morning person or are you a nighttime person, right?
Yeah.
So I think I definitely do my best work in the morning, essay writing, work, etc. Um, and I also know I do my best work after exercise. It's, after I exercise, I think I just feel very refreshed and sharp. So it's,
Yeah.
I would exercise in the morning. But work already starts kind of early, so it's like I do need to wake up like much earlier. Let's say go for like a 45-minute run, hit the gym for 30 minutes, um, and then get like a good like hour or two session before work. Um, that worked best for me. I liked what you said about lunch breaks. So when I was in the office, um, I would try to like secretly study for LSAT, but then once I was remote, it was a little bit more comfortable, right?
Yeah.
Just having my books to the side. Hey, I'm gonna do like a logic game section, or like I'm just gonna hit a section for 35 minutes, and
Yeah.
change my icon to a hamburger on Slack. Um,
Uh-huh.
but finding the pockets of time where I could, do real study, similar to you, was I think crucial for me because um, I think I kind of see it as like maybe a battery where, you know, I see a lot of times students do studying with like 30% or 20% battery. They have a long day at work, and after the long day, they're like, okay, time to study for 3 hours. I'm like, maybe try to study when your battery's a little bit higher. So after work,
Mm.
like go for a walk, like get dinner with a friend, and then come down, you're charged, and it's not
Yeah.
like empty study. Um, so I'll do a little bit in the morning, a little bit during lunch, and also like you, I think I knew myself. I did need to have like some buffer. So like after work, um, maybe I'd like hang out with like my girlfriend or like see my family, and then I knew before bed, I had that recharge period, and then I would touch base again. Um, but I think what you said about the Friday Saturday, I think is crucial. If people know what circumstances lead to empty studying, it's very important to, um, maybe put studying to the side, and then put yourself in a circumstance where it's higher quality studying.
Yeah, for sure. And if you have the trade-off between doing something you really enjoy
Yeah,
versus doing completely empty, non-productive studying,
yeah,
I mean, the trade-off is obvious. Do something you enjoy.
yeah,
Go recharge.
yeah,
Get,
yeah. I
you know,
yeah,
have fulfillment, and then come back.
yeah, and that seems very underrated, right, John? Because I think a lot of people they do kind of tend to skew with I need to study all the time, or like I have to do like 10 hours, and it's like, hey, if you did something you enjoyed, whatever, you know, painting, going outside, seeing friends, and just recharge your battery a little bit, and then that quality of study can be so much better. Um, yeah, the um,
And there is the
Yeah.
other end of the spectrum, though. Like, there's some people who are like, I'm going to study for half an hour, 3 days a week
Yeah.
for, whatever duration. Like, you can overcorrect the other way too. Like, you have
Yes,
to have,
definitely,
I think that
definitely.
you do need some chunks of time
Yes,
that
yes,
you have to find in there.
yes. Yeah. So that's why I really like how you put it on a spectrum, right? Where it's like there are, oftentimes people on one end where it's like 10 hours or nothing, and there's very much
Yeah.
people on the other end where it's, like maybe we can add a little bit more, and or we can go a little bit closer to the center. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you were pressed and you said, all right, you don't have to tell people when to study, what the durations look like, but total number of hours per week for how many months do does the typical person need to study? Like, just giving people just a bit of a baseline of like, all right, this may not be exactly what I need to do, but at least it's kind of giving me a ballpark of what is um, typical.
Mhm. I would say hard question, but um, maybe like I think it's reasonable to say like 10 hours of studying a week where you just, you have, well, maybe people have the weekends if they're students, or, um, everyone's schedule is going to be looking a little bit different. But if you can just
Hmm.
find pockets of time, and I think, let's say you take a P test, right? Then you have to review it, and you want to review some sections, or, um, go over concepts. I think that sounds reasonable. I will say one thing that does feel very concrete is, I'm sure you've seen this a lot too, but a lot of times, I mean, it's again on that spectrum, right? But I think one thing that is very just concrete good is when people take the LSAT when they're ready. Um, a lot of times people just set a date and they're like, oh, well, okay, like I guess I'm just going to take it. And it's I guess it's good to work backwards, right? It's like, okay, let's set a test date. I want to be like in like good form, like around this time, so that when I take the test, it just feels like another repeat, another practice test, right?
Hmm.
So I think that kind of it's kind of like, again, back to exercise. People who are running marathons, right, or half marathon, you have a date and then you work backwards from there. Okay, it's like I'm going to start 3 mile runs, 5 mile runs. Um, yeah.
So how many
Um,
months out do you think people should be targeting that test date? So
yeah.
you're recommending 10 hours a week, and I'll give my recommendation afterwards too,
Yeah.
because I think we differ a tiny bit
Yeah.
on it
Mhm.
potentially. But so, roughly 10 hours a week.
Mhm.
How many months out someone be looking to take the test?
Yeah. And I like how your opinion differs from mine, because I'm sure you're going to say a little bit more. I was just scared to say too much. And hey, I don't know who I'm talking to, but I do think I think I definitely studied more than 10 hours. But I
Yeah, I
just,
think 10 hours,
yeah,
I would say is a good minimum. I like to
yeah,
see people treat it like a part-time job, about 20 hours a week.
exactly.
I think
Yeah.
is pretty fair. Because even if you're
Yeah.
working, even if you're, going to school full time, most people can balance a part-time job with that. And
Yeah.
the LSAT should be that part-time job.
Yes.
And
I,
just to be clear, on
yeah.
my LSAT journey, I did quit my full-time job like a month and a half out from the LSAT, and then the LSAT became my full-time job for the final push
Yes.
to be able to get to
Yes.
where I wanted to be. So I don't know that I could have gotten there without walking away from some other responsibilities that I had, uh, and freeing up that time to then focus in on the LSAT.
Yes. I think I'm going to change my answer and go up a little bit, because I do remember when I was studying, when someone told me, "Hey, I think you should treat it like a part-time job." That changed my mindset, and I think that's where I start to lock in a little bit more. Everyone's going to be on a different end of the spectrum, but I do think if wherever you are, if you do have that mindset, it's like, oh, this is actually quite important, and I'm going to treat it like a part time job where I need to get my reps in. um, I think that is for the best. Um, how many?
Yeah,
Hmm?
and I have seen people be successful at 10 hours a week. It just usually takes them a lot longer,
A lot longer.
instead of,
Yes,
so I
yes,
usually tell people, roughly 20 hours a week, 15 to
that's
25
fair.
hours a week, somewhere in
Yeah,
that zone, right?
yeah,
For somewhere in the 3 to 5 month range, and
yes,
you're probably going to be approaching something towards your potential.
yes.
Now, if you're doing 10 hours a week, you start to see that trail up to
Longer, longer.
5 to 7 months, maybe
Yeah,
nine
a
months,
year.
depending on
Yeah,
how consistent you're
yeah.
being.
And I will
There's
say, yeah, I'm,
some
yeah,
amount of compounding. Oh yeah, I was just gonna say there's some amount of compounding that you lose when you go too low in the number. Like if you're only doing like 5 hours a week, I feel like it'll take you forever to get
oh
to
yeah,
your goal. Like
yeah,
it's not only like twice as long as it would if you were 10 hours or 4 times as long if you were 20 hours. It ends up being like 8 times or 10 times as long because you're not
yeah,
getting this compounding effect of like seeing hitting the repetition, seeing the patterns,
yeah.
and starting to like really unlock the things. It's so much harder in like really tiny durations.
John, I'm actually going to switch my answer to be more in line with yours because I think I was thinking so much of the person of like the 30-minute studying, right? Where I was like, no, 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 like we just need to get you in the gym. We just need you to get some reps in. But I will say, one other thing I was thinking as I was saying that was, uh, sometimes if the studying is like over such a long period of time, it's it's a little bit more difficult, right? Because studying for LSAT is quite hard. And, if you stretch
Yeah.
over a long, long period of time, a lot of things happen in life, right? Maybe like you get a lot busier, or maybe there's some new circumstances um, that kind of interfere with the quality of the LSAT study and, make it harder for you to reach your potential. So I do think when you make studying a little more intense and over a shorter period of time, you can control that. One of the things that you said that reminded me of what my mentor said was when I was considering law school, and I was like, do I study for that like LSAT? And so I reached out to an alum from my school who was a lawyer, and he took time to talk to me and told me, he was like, you know what, John, studying for LSAT, very, very difficult, but it's important to communicate to others that like you are doing this, and for a certain period of time you won't be as available. And
Yeah.
he said something along the lines of, whoever is like very, very important will still be there afterwards. Like you don't have to worry about that. So I think that like
Yeah.
mindset of commitment and of like a short duration of intensity, I think is for the best. Exactly like you said, like if someone's like a junior or senior in university, right? Maybe taking that 3 months of summer and
Mhm.
really like getting some reps in like 3, 5, 6 months. Um, like half a year range, I think is fair game. But when you stretch it to like 1, 2, 3, it's definitely still okay. But I think it's there's more possibilities of interruptions and maybe you forget things,
For
etc.
sure. Yeah, and just like reducing that risk of interruption
Yes.
because big things are going to happen. You're not going to go through all 4 years of college and nothing significant's going to happen that's going to
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
really rock you. Like
Yeah.
typically you're going to get something, maybe every year, maybe every other year, big events that are going to happen in your life. A loved one gets sick, or someone gets in a car accident, or,
Yeah.
you take ill. There's a
Yeah.
lot of people who, just their health ends up being a big impediment to them being able to study effectively for the test because they've got all these other things that they're
Yeah.
trying to juggle with that. So minimizing the risk of one of those things happening by keeping a tighter time frame, I think is a wise idea.
Yeah. And it kind of like serves as an impetus too, right? Where it's if
Yeah.
you're like, oh, like 2, 3 years, like yeah, I don't know, and it's like I don't feel like studying today. But when you're on that time frame, right, where it's like, okay, I'm aiming for you know this test date, and I'm working like 6, 7 months back, and it's like, um, it gives you that push, right? Because I do think, I know definitely for me, and maybe this is, I think this is the case for most people, where sometimes it takes a little bit to get into the groove, right? Where it's, you have like 1 month or like a month and a half, 2 months, where it's like I don't really know what I'm doing, but then you kind of like find your groove, right? Where hopefully
Yeah.
through like tutoring, or you read, like you just kind of know how to study a little bit more effectively, and because you have that intense time period, you can get better and focus.
Yeah, and it's very difficult to have a long time horizon.
Yeah.
Um, are you familiar with the marshmallow study at all? Have you
No,
heard
but
of this?
I'm very interested.
Okay. So the marshmallow study, and I don't know how much I agree with the results of the study, but it's interesting to think about. Potentially these could be the results.
Yeah.
So they would put a kid in a room with a marshmallow, and they said, "All right, we got something we got to do. We'll be right back. If you don't eat the marshmallow, we'll give you 2 marshmallows." And so the kid's alone in the room with the marshmallow, with the promise if they don't eat it, they're going to get 2 marshmallows back. And so the researchers concluded, which I think there's other explanations for this, but this is an interesting explanation, anyways. That and then some of the kids did eat the marshmallows, and some of the kids didn't. And so the kids that did not eat the marshmallow and they waited to get that second marshmallow, they followed them over a long period of time, and they found that later in life, those people tended to be more successful than the people who just, as soon as they left the room, they ate the marshmallow. So it's
Yeah.
this idea of like delayed gratification. Like if you can
Yes.
have a longer time horizon where you say, okay, well, I really want to do this thing tonight. I really want to do this thing right now or this week, but I even more want this thing that's twice as good, that's so much harder. I have to hold off on doing the thing that I want to do right now to get to
Yeah.
the thing that I want to do later.
Yeah.
Um, that getting that by setting that test date, that can kind of give you the fortitude to say, well, there is this thing coming that is going to be
Yes.
super impactful.
Yeah.
I am willing to make some sacrifices in the now, because there will be
Yeah.
sacrifices. You
There
have to
will be.
decide
Yes.
what you want to sacrifice.
Yeah.
What I have to sacrifice in the now to be able to get to the thing that I want in the future. And the people who are able to do it probably tend to be more successful
Yeah.
than the people who find it much more difficult to do.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that translates to a lot of other things outside LSAT, but I do think that concept of delayed gratification could be quite useful, right? Where it's, yeah, just thinking about what my mentor said, right? Like, hey, for, the couple of months that you said, whatever, 3, 4, 5 months, whatever time period you're working with, um, the schedule will be a little different. You have another part-time job, right? And
Yeah.
you recognize that it's important. You set up things in place to kind of push you forward, test date. Um, yeah, exactly. Delayed gratification now for um, happiness a little bit later.
Yeah, and I think what we've also cautioned people: don't delay all of your gratification until
Yes.
later, though, too.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
You just have to decide. You have to delay some of it, right? But
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be all of it, because if you're
Yeah.
always delaying gratification, you'll never get gratification, right?
Yeah.
So just finding a way to find out what's important to you, what is meaningful to you, what does recharge you, and focusing on those things, and maybe getting rid of some of the things that aren't as beneficial to you and
Yeah.
that you don't get as much out of.
And I like how you touched on that note where, to the listeners that are 100% or nothing, it's important. I think one thing that helps a lot is, the LSAT is quite a beast. And um, I think treating studying like an experiment is very helpful. So, you know, if someone is like foregoing, like, I don't know, morning walks that they like, it's like, hey, that morning walk actually helps you be at your best, right? And that's a variable that you can modulate for study. Like, okay, this
Yeah.
is a good one, right? Or um, I don't know, maybe someone like um, as opposed to some other variables. So it's like in making sacrifices, you can kind of see the whole system and see what works and what doesn't work. But I do think in finding a structure that works best, that experiment analogy is quite helpful because you can try something and see if it works for you. So, I've had some students say like, oh, like how, like, how did you get past plateaus, or how, like, what are like certain things that like really worked for you? And I told them, um, changing where I study was, I think, quite helpful for me, where I started studying outside more, and it kind of helped me, um, like focus a little bit more. Say if I was in a coffee shop and it's like, all right, I got my coffee, or I got my tea. This is like my ticket. Like, time to make this tea worth it. Or I see everyone else focus. It's like, okay, I'm going to focus too. So like the
Yeah.
library, um, working inside, outside. How is the format? Are you working like paperback, online? There's so many things that you can modulate, and I think paying attention to when you are at your best, when you do control for something, is quite helpful.
Yeah, and it is a big experiment throughout the process of studying,
Yeah.
right? And at the very beginning, you're experimenting with like which strategies work well for me.
Yeah.
Like,
What am
do
I
I want to do it
doing?
this way? Do I
Yeah.
want to do it? Is it stimulus
Yeah.
first, then question stem? Is it question
Yeah.
stem first, then stimulus?
Yeah.
That answer could be different for different people.
Yeah.
So trying to figure out, you know, what strategies work, there's some experimentation. What resources you connect with, there's some experimentation. If you're working with a study group, like who in that study group
Yes.
do you really connect with?
Yes.
um, you know all these different things. And then as you're going and you hit these plateaus, you're like, okay, well, now I gotta, you don't want to change like some of your foundational study habits or some of your foundational strategies that you're using, but you can start to try some new stuff, like,
Yes.
go out, study outside, study in the morning, study in the evening. um, and knowing, yeah, when you get your best work done, whether it's evening or mornings, that's super important. And you want to
Yeah.
probably match your studying to that, because you're probably going to match your actual test date to that, so
Yes.
that and then you have this consistency of like 2 o'clock or whatever it is, or if it's
Yeah.
9 a.m., that your like brain automatically starts to shift on its own
Yes.
into like LSAT mode.
Yeah. Just to piggyback off that, I think one of the best things someone told me was give your best give your best hours to the LSAT, right? Where, this is like a high performance, um, kind of event where, you wouldn't want to, I don't know, go like do a very important basketball game, right? Or do like you're performing for a play. You don't want to go at 30% and you're tired. For these like high performance one time things, you want to be at your best. So give, your studying time, give it your best time. So I do think that's great advice.
Yeah, and I think if we kind of like broaden that out even further, like give your best hours to your highest priority items. So
Yes.
whether that's the LSAT right now, or if that's, law school when you're a 1L, or if that's the bar once you've graduated law school, like whatever is your highest priority item, you should be giving you the best hours of the day to.
Yes.
And if you do that, you'll almost certainly see greater success.
Yeah. One thing I was also thinking about, John, like you made some excellent points that kind of, I think I took a step back and I was like, a lot of what we're talking about and what you've been saying is centered around, accountability, that shorter time frame. We set that date and we're working within, like the, like we're going to have to run a marathon, right? Like let's start getting some reps in, or, you know, letting others know like, hey, I'm going to be studying for this, knowing what sacrifices you're going to make for, your list of priorities. Um, I liked how you touched on the study groups, because I think that was something that I found quite helpful. Where, and again, it's all like, taking a step back, centered around accountability. Um, and I will say, uh, I think I'm like quite extroverted. So some people might be like, oh, I don't want to study with someone else. What if it doesn't mesh? And I would definitely say, um, if you, it, definitely don't have to study in person, but there's a world of people there that are studying for the LSAT, and if you engage with forums, maybe you're like more in the LSAT mode, right? Or you meet with someone online, and if it doesn't work, then no problem. But I do think that was a huge resource for me, and I ended up studying. It's funny. I think my three best study buddies, two just happened to be from Michigan, but another one, and I think the person I studied the most with, she was from Korea. So working through the time zones and just sharing, um, like LSAT experiences with like studying, and like, hey, I found this resource that's like might be good for you, or you're reviewing something, and it's one thing to convince yourself, right? Like, hey, yeah, I understand this, but it's another thing to explain to someone else, right?
Yeah.
And have a conversation. I think I always tell students, it's so important to keep engagement high, right? Not we see the answer and you're like, yeah, that does sound pretty good, but you like really like why is it the answer? Why are the other ones not the answer? And really getting to like the nitty gritty and
Yeah.
understanding the nuances. I think talking to someone else really facilitates that kind of um, higher level like engagement with the LSAT.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hack your own biology a little bit by doing that because,
Yeah.
when you're explaining something to yourself, there's not as much of a um, imperative as when you're explaining something to somebody else. So, like, if you're working with a study buddy and they missed an answer choice and you got that one right, but they got it wrong and they picked C. Now you're going to try to explain to them why C was incorrect. Now you're
Yeah.
going to bring a lot more of yourself to that, like the best version of yourself to that, because you're in there helping somebody else. And when we help other people, we tend to go above and beyond for other people more so than we do
Yes.
for ourselves a lot of
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
And especially when you're studying on your own. So you're kind of like putting yourself in the position to dive as deep as you possibly can on that explanation, which is going to give you the deepest understanding you can possibly get, but it's coming from this like altruistic place.
Yeah. And um, it's funny that you say that, John, because I 100% agree. And I think, even with questions, or definitely with questions we get right, maybe we miss on some nuances, or talking to someone else about it, and trying to help them is um, very, very beneficial for us too. And, it helps the other person. And in that system, I would say the system, or what has worked best for me is being open, right? So I think sometimes when I wouldn't be open, like, oh, I'm actually like kind of confused about this. Like, do you mind if we like stay on this question for some more time? Um, I think when I didn't do that, sometimes the studying wouldn't be as good. So being um,
Yeah.
open and just working together to understand questions, I think is very, maybe you don't see as many questions, but the quality, I think, for me has tended to be like quite high in something like that.
Yeah, and if it's a tutor you're working with and not a study buddy, then you should never move on from a question without
100%.
fully
Yeah.
understanding
Yeah.
exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
Don't ever be shy. Be as
Yeah.
open as you possibly can
Yeah.
and get to the bottom of it because
Yeah.
that's what they're there for. That if you're
Exactly.
with a tutor, they're absolutely there for that one singular thing. When you're with a study
Yeah.
buddy, you always have to balance your time and their time, a
Yeah.
little bit. But you definitely want to be open throughout the whole process, regardless.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so we've only got a few minutes left. I wanted to kind of give us people a sense of like, all right, so we've talked about study schedules, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 6 months, let's say we've kind of landed on
Yeah.
treat it like a part-time job.
Mhm.
Stay consistent, build a study schedule that you can stick with, that's going to work for you, customize it, personalize it, study it, give it your best hours of the day. Now, as far as time of the year. I think this one is important to touch on before we wrap up so people can get a sense of,
Yeah.
because we also said target an LSAT date, but if you get there and you're not ready for it, you shouldn't just be like, well, I signed up for it, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
I think there's value in having some options there.
Yeah.
So one group of students I've seen be successful year after year after year, call them the New Year's resolution students. So they come in early in January, and I don't know whether they made this as their resolution or not, but it feels that way, where they come in, they say, all right, I'm going to study for the LSAT. That's my New Year's resolution. I'm going to make time for it. I'm going to prioritize it. And then they come in and they hit the ground running in January, targeting the June LSAT. So they're giving themselves, 5 full months to really get things together. If they don't make June, if they make June, that's perfect. Then they do their applications over the summer. They're ready to apply first thing when applications come out in the fall. If they don't make June, the next stop is typically August. And so then they've got another 2 months where it's not just like bang, bang, where like it's back to back. They can even take a little bit of a rest after that June test and kind of relax. And then if they need to, get back to it, and then they're back for August. And then they can put applications together over the next month and a half and be ready to apply as early as possible in the cycle. If August doesn't work, then you got September. That's your last stop. And then you're still in premium position to apply. You've given yourself 8-9 months of studying. You should be at your full potential, and you should be able to roll in early in the cycle. You get the best of studying for a long period of time, but not too long, and also getting your applications in as early as possible. What do you think of the New Year's resolution style studying?
I was going to say, I definitely think that's the optimized way to do it, because you don't want to be writing apps and studying. You're kind of in a scramble. Each of them, take their own time.
Right.
And I really, really like how within the system you have cushion, right? Because life happens. Or, John, I had a student message me saying, my proctor messed up, like, rah, rah. And, if you're doing that late, it's like, oh man, like I have to wait. It's a little bit more stress, or it's much more stressful. But if you have that cushion, you have that time horizon. I like how, just with how the dates are structured, right? You like, take some time off and come back, but with that time horizon, you're kind of like in LSAT mode, and you have the security to, focus on one particular important thing at a time. I think that system is probably for the best.
Yeah, and what's nice too is that if you're in school still, if you're a working professional, your schedule's pretty standard throughout the year. But if you're in school still, the June test is usually about a month after finals end. So you've got a month of just like straight LSAT to lead into that June test. And then the June test is not around any other major milestones in the academic year. The August test, you may be just getting back to school or maybe not, but it's in that kind of early period where you're not quite to midterms yet. You haven't hit any of the hard stuff yet, so you get that kind of fallback so the June's kind of premium, the fallback's easy. You've got the whole summer to study if June doesn't work out. If June does work out, you get to enjoy your summer, right? And you get to get your applications together. But it kind of gives you, like, thinking about it in terms of the academic year, it just makes a ton of sense to get that trajectory.
Yeah, I definitely think so too. And we're addressing like different groups, like whatever group you're in, and also with when the scores come back, right? You can like modulate, like, oh, okay, like I think I could do a little better, and because I'm on this time horizon, like, okay, like I'll sign up for this test, or I already have that test signed up, and I like have the security, like, okay, don't need to take it. So I think, regardless of what bucket you're in, taking that time limit is quite helpful.
And I would also just give people one last piece of advice when they're studying, because I see this every year, people studying for the January LSAT. it's late in the cycle. I know it's probably not your first choice
Yeah.
as to what you're
Yeah.
studying for. You were hoping for
Yeah.
maybe October or November. But
Yeah.
again, you put yourself in the position where, like, if you don't hit it in October and you don't hit it in November, and all of a sudden you're waiting until January, you've got winter break, you've got holidays, you've got family
Yeah.
in town, you've
All
got
this. Yeah.
travel, you're going to
Yeah.
see your old friends
Yeah.
from high school,
Yeah.
you've got New Year's Eve, you
Yeah.
get like all of this stuff. And people are like, no, I can buckle down, I can do it. Like, most people are good in the summer, they can buckle down and
Yeah.
get it done. But during winter break, it's just like mayhem in the schedule, and it's just so
Yeah.
hard to stay focused. You almost lose a month there
Yeah.
in that time.
I 100% agree. And, just touching based on what you're saying again, um, yeah, earlier you apply, the better, the more scholarships, the more seats are available. Don't put yourself in it's, I'm thinking it's like similar to like, standardized testing, like to get into university. So like SAT, ACT, you don't want to be in that, I guess for like US based listeners, in that senior year fall, where you're writing essays and you're scrambling and I have to study this. And if you set it in a way that you can be more comfortable, I think that would be for the best. Also, like you said, I think it's very realistic, whatever bucket you're in, to realize the holidays tends to be quite busy. And even like, let's say like someone's schedule isn't busy, it's maybe people get FOMO, and there's all these friends or there's all these things happening. It's like, oh, and now I gotta like see here. So control for things where you can be at your best. So I think 100% agree. Shifting that timeline a little bit earlier is 100% for the best.
And there's, if you're working, there's holiday parties, there's get-togethers, there's functions like that. All that stuff gets really wild around that time of year. And then, also there's, some people get a little affected by the colder weather, the shorter days, the less sunshine. You may lose some motivation during that time too.
Exactly.
So like, kind of keep that in mind as well.
Yeah. I think those are excellent points where, regardless of what bucket you're in, but please shift to this mindset.
As much as you can.
Yeah, as much as you can.
That's all you got. That's all you got. But if you can help it, and the earlier you do it, the test is good for a couple of years. Technically it's good for 5 years. A lot of schools like to see a more recent test, but it's very rare that somebody takes it too early. It's certainly the case that a lot of people take it too late. So if you're thinking about it, get on it sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
All right, perfect.
Yeah.
Well, John, as always, it was great chatting with you, and we'll do it again next week.
Yep. See you, John.